All right, last item, let's have a briefing on the Kroll report. City Manager, you want to kick us off? Or we're waiting for the chief?
Let me see, make sure my mic, it's been a while since I've sat here, sir.
It's good to have you back here again.
Thank you very much. Yes, so this evening we're pleased to present an update in terms of the work that the Kroll consultants have been doing here with the police academy, the pilot academy that's currently in place. What I'd like to do is turn it over to our director for the Office of Police Oversight, Farrah Muscadin, who will then introduce the topic and hand it over to our consultants. After that presentation, Chief Joe Chacon, our newly confirmed chief, will be here to provide feedback on the report that's been given and the progress that the department has made in terms of the recommendations that Kroll has put forward.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Farrah Muscadin, Director of the Office of Police Oversight. I am happy to present to you our consultants from Kroll and Associates. This evening, we have with you Mark Ellers, Dan Linsky, and Rick Brown. They have been working since about this summer when the Academy started in June as an independent evaluator for the Pilot Academy. They are here to present preliminary findings. We are finishing about the week of this Pilot Academy, and so they're going to be presenting their findings up until this point. I'll now turn it over to our consultants. Mark?
Thank you, Farrah. Good evening, everyone.
As the consultants begin, I just want to apologize on behalf of the council. I know you guys have been here now for 4 or 5 hours, and we appreciate that and apologize.
No problem. Thank you for that. Let me just say on behalf of the Kroll team, Rick, Dan, and I, we want to thank you and the City of Austin for the trust you've placed in us to help with the city's reimagining policing efforts. So for the next 15 or 20 minutes or so, we'd like to provide kind of a high-level summary of our overall assessment of the APD Training Academy through the first 4 months of the 144th cadet class. And we'll highlight what we believe the Academy is doing well and a few areas that remain a work in progress and may need some area for improvement. If it's possible for me to share the screen, if that can be transferred to me, I don't know if that's okay. Let me just pull up. I have a presentation.
Mayor Adler, while they're pulling that up, do you mind if I make a brief statement?
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, I appreciate that. So I just wanted to let everybody know I'm going to be camera off moving forward, but my staff and I are listening in.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, so I believe hopefully everybody can see the slides.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So just as a reminder and backdrop, Kroll's role as independent evaluator is to verify the department's implementation of the Kroll recommendations that we had made back in our assessment report back in April. And as part of the evaluator, our job is to assess whether the department is developing a transformational police academy that addresses issues of racial and gender equity, emphasizes de-escalation, incorporates diverse perspectives through community partnerships, and develops resilient officers through effective and inclusive adult learning. And it is all done with the goal of developing a best-in-class police academy. This 34-week training program began back on June 7th with the pilot 2-week Community Connect or Community Orientation Program, and it's then followed by 32 weeks of training. Currently, the Academy is in week 20. If we consider all 34 weeks, they're in week 20. They're in week 18 of that 32-week training segment. Just a number of positive additions to the Academy, all of which are essentially firsts for the 144th cadet class and for which we believe the department deserves a lot of credit. And this includes adding 30 hours of community engagement programming, successfully creating and implementing the 2-week community orientation program called Community Connect, incorporating anti-racism training for both staff and cadets, They've also added an 8-hour course on the history of police and race, which addresses the historical forces in Austin and elsewhere that impact modern perceptions of the police among communities of color and why people develop different perspectives of law enforcement. They've more than doubled physical fitness training in this academy class, and they've created a formalized process of community and academic civilian input into training content, and specifically referring to the Academy Curriculum Review Committee and the Community Video Review Panel, both of which have provided valuable community input to ensure that issues of racial equity and procedural justice are considered in all aspects of cadet training. Also like to note that from the start of the 144th cadet class, Chief Chacon and his executive leadership team have appropriately emphasized that the mission of the Academy is to train future officers to serve the community and treat everyone with dignity and respect, while emphasizing sensitivity to community concerns, cultural competency, the importance of critical thinking and adult learning. And according to a recently administered anonymous cadet survey, the vast majority of cadets have in fact affirmed that staff has positively emphasized community engagement and community policing throughout training. So as indicated, the department successfully implemented the pilot 2-week Community Connect program, which provided cadets with valuable perspectives from community members and organizations, prioritized community concerns as a key element of academy training, and encouraged cadets to embrace their role as guardians by engaging with members of the Austin community. Increased community engagement programming has also been an important part of this academy, as the training schedule includes more than a dozen sessions devoted to community-focused content led by community leaders and activists from a wide variety of organizations, many listed on this screen. The purpose of this programming is to reinforce the importance of empathy when interacting with the diverse communities that the cadets as sworn officers will be called upon to serve. I would also just add here, in addition to the increased community engagement, there's increased community input through the 2 committees I previously mentioned, the Curriculum Review Committee and the Video Review Panel, both of which have increased transparency into academy training and allowed meaningful dialogue with local community and academic participants in the various aspects of cadet training. We have some concerns over the video review process, although that's being addressed, but overall we've been very pleased with the positive dialogue that has occurred with both committees, and all of which are meant to enhance the Academy's emphasis on procedural justice, empathy, acknowledgement of racial trauma, de-escalation, and sensitivity to community concerns. And as indicated, this is the first cadet class to include anti-racism training of staff and cadets. It's been in the form of a 2-day groundwater analysis in a workshop led by Joyce James Consulting. And as reported by Ms. James's team, the workshop sessions have included meaningful discussions and exercises for cadets to better understand important issues regarding racial equity. Based on the cadet and the staff feedback we've received, we found that the workshops have been impactful. They've allowed cadets and staff to ponder tough and sometimes uncomfortable questions, while also allowing for honest conversations with each other and participating community members. And I'm going to turn it over to Rick for the next several slides here.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Yes. Increased cultural competency and DEI training. The 144th cadet class includes increased attention to diversity, equity, and inclusion training. In addition to the history of police and race in America, Academy training has also included valuable instruction on multiculturalism, policing issues related to the transgender and LGBTQ+ communities, procedural justice, and interacting with Spanish-speaking populations, among other important courses. There is also a focus on issues addressing professionalism and ethics and related topics. Course evaluations to date, Kroll has observed, either in person or through a remote camera system, approximately 220 hours of academy training, including all course content related to cultural competency training, professional and ethical policing, and other courses that impact police community relations and trust building. A summary of Kroll's course assessments that relate to these areas are included in sections 6, 8, and 9 of our report. Use of external content experts. While some courses, including the history of police and race, interacting with individuals who are deaf or hard of hearing, and victims of crime, are or will be taught or co-taught by outside subject matter experts, we believe more classes should be co-taught by external subject matter experts, particularly the DEI-related and cultural competency courses. Multiculturalism and human relations, for example, and racial profiling. For example, we work with researchers, academics that work with police and have that can give a better understanding of the importance of analyzing data and how it can impact policy and decision-making by leaders of the department. This area remains an area needed for improvement. Adult learning methods. Instructors are making a good faith effort to utilize a variety of instructional techniques, including lectures, visual aids, and handouts, class discussion, case studies, and role plays. Classroom culture is disciplined and orderly, but most instructors encourage questions and class participation. Although some verbatim reading of APD policies or legal code still occurs, there is less reliance on verbatim reading of materials than in years past. The lack of videos has impacted some of these methods. Next slide, Mark. Academy culture. The Academy is making positive strides in shifting to a more balanced, resilience-based training model. Overall, however, a military-style culture still prevails at the Academy, with an emphasis on disciplinary measures and collective accountability. Acceptance by APD instructors of implemented reforms appear to be mixed. In the cadet survey, for example, more than half of cadets, 54.2%, reported that instructors have occasionally ridiculed the contempt of a reimagined police academy. This is particularly countered by the fact that most cadets, 91.4%, believe the staff places a positive emphasis on community engagement and community policing. While we cannot realistically expect complete culture change in the first 15 weeks of the academy, it is essential that the department and officers who train future officers accept and buy into the changes and reforms that are needed. Kroll will continue to monitor these developments in the second half of our academy training assessment. De-escalation training. Academy instruction includes a significant emphasis on de-escalation training and tactics, including ICAT, which means integrating communications, assessment, and tactics, an evidence-based best practice designed by the Police Executive Research Forum, or also known as PERF, and verbal communications as a de-escalation tactic. The instructors have demonstrated a solid grasp of the material and exhibited a positive attitude toward the subject matter. Kroll will continue to monitor other related training, including how the Academy teaches force options, which is scheduled in mid-October. And I have personally attended the ICAT training and a portion of the force option training because it's so important to the department. With that, I will turn it over to Dan.
Thank you, Rick. Defensive tactics and team building exercises. We've seen a change from the initial days of kind of boot camp greetings of the cadets where they're placed under stress and the stress reaction drills that were put forward and changed into team building exercises, which were well planned, well executed. They put the cadets in physically and mentally stressful environments throughout the exercises. They had to problem solve. They had to work together as a team. They had to develop leaders amongst them and get through the problems. And it was well done in a positive and controlled environment. In fact, in interviews we did with cadets, they were asking for more of that if possible. Similarly, the self-defense training, which used to be fight day and will to win, was pushed back where the Learned Skills Unit gave the cadets the actual physical skills and experiences before they went kind of hands-on, where they had to go into a ring with an instructor and make sure that they were kind of willing to engage in stressful situations. They were well done, safely done. The cadets were placed in stress, and the academy staff is having that conversation less of a us versus them conversation that used to occur before, I believe, and now it's you versus stress, and the ability of cadets to master stress and go to their training when they're in situations that are critical, where force could be utilized and deployed. And then, as we saw in the role plays last week, not only to be able to meet a high level of stress with force, but then to de-escalate it quickly. An example was an individual armed with a knife came toward the officers. They had them drop the knife, and then the officers realized that they have to learn how to transition away from what was a lethal situation into a non-lethal situation and use their other tools. And the instructors were doing an excellent job of getting them through that process and got great information to them. Where you find the program is health and wellness is progressing. They're doing double the physical fitness training. Some of the cadets said it's the best shape they've been in their entire lives. I think there's some additional room for even more improvement there. And we've got some thoughts on how to better do that with maybe some timing, scheduling, and facilities improvements. In addition to the physical fitness, there is a health and wellness component and a mindfulness component that has been given to the cadets, which is instrumental in keeping them kind of grounded as they go through a very stressful training experience at the academy, and even more so giving them skills to deal with the stresses and issues they will face when they graduate and are working the streets of Austin and engaging the citizens. As many of us know, one of the leading causes of death for law enforcement officers is by their own hand. And that's because of a lack of providing tools to officers to identify stress and have programs to be mindful and well-rounded in your health and wellness. Along with physical training, there are physical training assessment standards. In the first 2 weeks, 2 cadets dropped out because they failed the physical training assessment. One of them was actually a very proficient runner. However, their ability to row was not what it needed to be when the 2 schools were combined, and they had to leave. And staff felt, and we agree, that they might have lost out on a good cadet who, in the course of training, could have been able to improve that physical fitness. And they went back and looked at the requirements. They actually went back and looked at the requirements they're currently using for SWAT, and determined that the runtime for SWAT might be a more appropriate level. And as a result, in some recent work that they've done, I believe they were to qualify 5 individuals who would have not met the standards that were originally in place when Kroll first saw them. So they're definitely working on that and looking for setting it up for what's fair and relevant. Next slide, Mark. The division manager has been very successful in working with staff at the academy, with community, with leadership of APD, with Kroll, and along with the academy commander to work towards all of the things we asked that they consider to implement short-term and long-term, and has been doing an amazing job getting that done. And the role for that position has expanded into lots of places. As such, there's a little need for more clarity and continued reinforcement concerning the exact role and responsibility of the division manager. And we address that in our report and give some options for what the PD might want to do. Fortunately, APD has been able to bring in Phil Axelrod to assist Dr. Cringen. He's a training supervisor, former Army veteran, former high school teacher with a master's degree in developing curriculum. And he's been working, doing the nuts and bolts with the academy staff to make sure that the adult learning model is in place and curriculum is updated and making best practices going forward. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Mark, and he'll take it from here.
Okay, thank you, Dan. So I just want to shift the focus a little bit to cadet separations. As of October 8th, there were 19 cadets that had separated from the 144th cadet class due to such things as injuries, academic failures, COVID-19 in a couple cases, and other reasons. However, as of today and in the last couple of weeks, there's actually been some additional separation. So actually these numbers would be adjusted, if I were doing this slide today, there are now a total of 24 cadet separations, so has pushed the attrition rate up to 24%. Probably if it stays there or right about there, that would be about average compared to many past of this size. However, if there's more separations, it'll be a cause for concern. Now, as described in section 11 of our report, cadet separations as of October 8th had slightly decreased the overall diversity of the 144th cadet class. However, if we include the most recent separations, it's actually even a little bit more stark of a difference. Black cadet representation has declined from 17% at the start of the cadet class to 14.5% of cadet classes of now. And the same is true for the percentage of female cadets. It has declined from 18% at the start of the cadet class to 14.5% of today's cadet class. So we will continue to keep an eye on that as well. Exits occur for a variety of reasons. Most often they're the result of injuries and illnesses or failure to meet academic testing standards. This chart displays the frequency of these reasons as of October 1st. If I were to update this chart today, the red triangle would probably go up from 3 to, I believe, 7 or 8. There's been several cadets recently that have left for personal reasons, kind of personal lifestyle choices. There's been one additional injury that resulted in a resignation. The other numbers are relatively same. The COVID number would go from 2 to 3. During the first 15 weeks of the academy, there were 57 cadets that had suffered on-duty injuries. Of those, 15 were categorized as major injuries requiring, in a few cases, hospitalization or temporary light duty, or in some cases, resignation from the academy. The rest of the injuries have been categorized as minor. And as noted, there have been, I believe, 6 injuries to date that have led to cadet exits. And so on. The minor injuries typically include dizziness, vomiting, exhaustion, swollen, bruised, strained body parts. These injuries, along with the major injuries, typically occur during the physical components of the training, such as defensive tactics, physical training, and performance accountability or behavioral modification sessions. Both the major and minor injuries were most likely to occur or most frequent during the performance accountability sessions. Another issue that had been raised recently by cadets was the Academy's apparent or perceived lack of accommodations for cadets who tested positive for COVID-19. In response, the department has been working on ways to retain cadets who are unable to continue due to injury or illness. And again, we will closely monitor cadet separations throughout the remainder of this cadet class. Concerning academic performance, cadets are given weekly tests for which they must not fail more than 3, and they're tested on a passing score of 70% for those. To date, 4 cadets have had to exit as a result of this requirement. In addition, a cadet can only qualify to take the final exam if their cumulative average on the weekly exams is at least 80%. While the number of cadets that have whose cumulative averages have fallen below 80% has fluctuated during the first 13 weeks, there has been a general decline in that number, with currently 12 cadets under that 80% mark. However, I would note that 8 of those 12 cadets currently have cumulative averages of 79% or better, and none of the cadets have a below 76% average. And in discussions with staff, they're reasonably confident that they expect all of those cadets should be able to get over that 80% threshold before the end of the class session is over. And section 3 of our interim report has a fairly detailed section on the progress and status of the department's implementation of each of Kroll's short-term and long-term recommendations that had been outlined in our report in April of this year. The majority of the short-term recommendations have been completed and verified. This slide highlights the short-term recommendations that continue to require some clarifications or adjustments or are still in progress. And we are hopeful and confident that we'll be in a position to verify hopefully full implementation of these short-term recommendations by our final report in early 2022. And likewise, there are a number of long-term recommendations that remain a work in progress. More work is needed to ensure that these recommendations are completed in time for the 144th cadet class. As part of our overall, or our role as independent evaluator, again, we'll continue to monitor progress on the department's implementation of these recommendations and include an update in our final report. We'll be happy to address any specific questions you may have about the department's progress on these recommendations during the Q&A session. And let me just turn over the final slide to Dan, who will discuss some additional recommendations or adjustments that we've included on our interim report. Dan?
Thanks, Mark. The work of the Video Review Committee was instrumental in identifying issues, concerns with the videos being shown to recruits. Now that that work has been done, the flaws in the video process have been identified. It's the belief and hope that the Academy will get the appropriate videos for their video library that balance the needs of everyone. Including if you have a video that shows, a use of force by an officer, can we balance that with a de-escalation video that occurs where another process was used? So it is important, though, for videos to be part of the learning process. Almost every cadet in their surveys and interviews we did with them said that many of whom were sight-oriented learners said that the lack of videos had made it harder for them to comprehend some of the material. So we think there's a way to do both, to get videos that are reflective of the concerns raised by the Video Review Committee. Performance accountability measures. It's necessary to build a team and hold people accountable. It's in some cases it seems like they're for minor errors and lapse of judgment. Obviously, probably more intense and necessary up front, and hopefully waning and going away down the road. One of the concerns is that sometimes based on timing, if it's given the inappropriate time, it's taking away from valuable class time where instructors are having to flip through slides and not give the cadets the time they need to go through all the material. Also, our hope would be that it would be given during defensive tactics or physical training time, if necessary, when cadets are limbered, pre-warmed up in proper equipment, hopefully in the gym or a proper area where they're less likely to be injured. There were a number of injuries during these events, and some of that might be from going from, sitting in the classroom to engaging in stressful exercise for 10 to 15 minutes. We haven't seen any humiliation or any of the concerns that were previously reported. It's all kind of geared towards team building, but scheduling and maybe some improvements at the Academy for infrastructure might make that less likely to cause injuries. Adjustments to Community Connect. Everyone felt it was important and got a great deal out of Community Connect. Some of the tension that came from it for recruits and staff is that the cadets started out with the community and then came back after 2 weeks and weren't quite ready for the Academy experience of showing up, not kind of being lax in your discipline in and on the hallways and how you report it. So both cadets and staff thought it might be helpful to start initially with at the Academy what the rules, what the regulations are, then go and meet some of the community and do some of the Community Connect work, and maybe even repeat some of that throughout the Academy to do the outreach. But having built a basic kind of set of rules that everyone knew what the expectations were when you were at the Academy for training. We also heard from staff, field training officers, and cadets that there used to be a program called Ride Outs, where some portion through the Academy, cadets would ride out with officers, FTOs, and actually see what the streets of Austin were like on a night. Many found that from their previous Academy staff, Academy officers we spoke to, that it helped take the PowerPoint off the wall, the training off the instructors' handouts, and made things come together. And we found that we agreed that would be a beneficial experience for cadets to go out and see what community policing in Austin is exactly. Chief Chacon and others actually conversations that when they were cadets and folks did ride out, some people made a decision, halfway through the academy before they've invested a lot of time, energy, and resources, and the city had, that they would, this career probably wasn't for them, and they had second thoughts. And we think there's some benefit to that for the officers to see community policing from inside the police car as well. As noted, clarity for the role of the division manager, and we've set some options forward for section 5.4 as the things that can be done there, just to make sure that the division manager can focus on the training, the curriculum, and the transition of the culture at the police department. Coordination between the Learned Skills Unit and the Cadet Training Unit. I think some of this is our fault, both Kroll and folks at the city trying to get, once we got a class together, we kind of said to the academy staff, you need to get a schedule together. We asked for more time, which had them scrambling to put a schedule together. And as such, the usual coordination between the units didn't occur. So we were teaching, in some cases, advanced first aid before we had taught basic first aid, and doing training that came out of sequence. So we want to make sure that the academy gets together schedules, the building blocks appropriately, so the cadets can learn from the previous experiences and trainings that they've had. LSU staffing needs, the Learned Skills Unit, is the team that teaches, physical training with cadets. They also teach the firearms work as well. Very professional, well-trained staff. Everything they do is kind of building blocks for cadets, but they're also staffed, challenged with doing on-service training for your officers that are in the streets and your FTO officers. And my belief, and I think the belief of many, is that the more officers are training and comfortable on how to use their empty hand control tactics, their lower levels of force, the less likely it is that we use tasers and batons. And as such, they have outside staffing needs along with cadet classes that sometimes leave them stretched thin. So we would recommend looking at supporting additional staff there. They do supplement with a diverse group of adjunct instructors when they can, but there may be some ability to do more there. The academy facility is a great facility. It's shared by 3 great public safety agencies. So police, fire, and EMS are all competing for the one gymnasium. The track outside has got some issues and concerns, and all of between in-service training and academy training, it's difficult sometimes to get proper space that's safer for physical fitness with pads and walls and the ability to fall and not be hurt. If at all possible, it's my personal belief that physical training should occur first thing in the morning when the heat of the Texas sun isn't out there, when cadets can come in, stretch, get in a good position, have a workout program. If we need to put them under stressful environments because of behavior modifications, that's the time to do it. And then let them shower, clean up, go into class, and focus on their education for the day. That would call for some either changing in schedules and hours of operations, or enhancement to the facility. I think I mentioned this before. I didn't speak till the age of 3. My mom had me tested, and now she says they can't shut me up. So I'm going to stop talking, and we're done, and we're open up for any questions you may have. And thank you for allowing us to present tonight.
Mayor, with your permission, what I'd like to do is go ahead and ask Chief Chacon to come up and make his brief presentation in terms of the response of the department to the recommendations.
Hang on a second, Chief.
How do I turn this on?
You're on. You're on.
Am I on? Okay, thank you. There's a PowerPoint presentation, short one. All right, very good. Good evening, Mayor, council members, ACM Ariano, Joseph Chacon, Chief of Police. I wanted to add some comments to those of the Kroll team to hopefully provide greater clarity around the work being done at the Academy. I want to thank the Kroll team. They've been very engaged in this effort, obviously, but specifically with staff at the Academy and with me and my staff as we've gone through this effort. They've been excellent in their communication as we progressed. The Kroll team has provided an extremely thorough report which details the complexity of Academy training, and I'm also extremely proud of our instructors and our leadership team at the Academy who actively participated in this evaluation process. If I can get the next slide, please. I've identified a few themes in the report that I'd like to discuss in greater detail before addressing the preliminary recommendations from Kroll. The themes include the Academy culture, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and community engagement. I want to highlight that throughout the report, Kroll identifies times that we addressed concerns immediately. This is one of the things that I asked for from Kroll as we were going through, and they have done that for us to let us know so that we could address it immediately and that could be highlighted in the reports that you're going to receive throughout. As an example, when we heard concerning remarks might have been made by some of our staff about the Reimagined Academy and the reimagination process, we immediately issued a survey with Kroll to the cadets to look into those, as well as during our exit interviews when we had cadets that were exiting out. Additionally, many of them expressed concerns with our protocols around COVID and a concern that they might wash out because they might catch COVID. And I immediately sent the highest level of protection that we had, which is the KN95 mask, to the Academy so that they had those instead of other masks that they might have been using, such as surgicals or gaiters. Next slide, please. Okay, so talking first about Academy culture. This theme is perhaps the most important part of the Academy change, and one that has had successes and also areas that we need to change. The areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion and community engagement have been instrumental in this area as well as we take steps towards Academy change. Our successes that we'd like to highlight: the adult learning. We've started incorporating various adult learning principles, including active learning. We're working on future Academy schedules that will facilitate more active learning and ensure that the content is appropriately scaffolded to achieve the best retention. With regard to the perception of our instructors, this has been positive throughout the report. Kroll watched the instructors and found them to be professional in their interactions with the cadets, and that the tenor was one of dignity and respect. And then the Learn Skills Unit, there have been past reports, certainly to council and others, that were critical of this team. However, Kroll did not witness a single interaction that was anything other than professional and supportive. Teaching in this area is a specialized skill set with constant active learning, and the report points out that the instructors are highly competent in their skills and effective in relaying the material. Given the scrutiny on use of force, we're extremely proud of the positive evaluation. We want our officers to be confident in their skill set and able to control and defend themselves if necessary. Last week, we just finished the response to resistance role plays, where instructors evaluated the cadets' ability to articulate their response to resistance, as well as their ability to transition to a lower use of force. I think that's what you heard the Kroll team talking about. We take this training extremely seriously and want to make sure that our cadets can identify situations accurately, act accordingly, and articulate their response. There are areas where we can improve and that we'll focus on. Performance accountability or group accountability has always been part of our Academy. We will be refining our process to ensure that we build in time for study sessions or group accountability during the first 14 weeks. In the current class, we're moving from the group accountability into the individual accountability phase. And group accountability will be limited. This is consistent with how we want our cadets to think about policing. First, we are responsible for each other's actions, but we ultimately must have individual personal accountability. helping to clarify the concept of reimagination. I'll just tell you, I was concerned when I first heard reports that instructors were mocking the Reimagined Academy. However, my team is in the process of developing a strategic plan that will go outlay for the next 3 to 5 years for making progress so that all training staff is aware of what the term represents in real, kind of measurable way. And I believe that clarity will lead to full buy-in by all staff. Next slide, please. In the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion, the groundwater analysis course that you heard about, Joyce James' team has done a great job of starting the initial conversations with the cadets, and we're looking forward to seeing how these cadets will utilize that knowledge and that lens in their policing. We also talked about the history of race and policing in America and in Austin. It was a class that we began teaching this academy. Kroll's report highlighted the expertise and skills of Dr. Kevin Foster, and we're grateful that he agreed to teach this course to the cadets. And victim services. They have already taught one class to our cadets, and they will be teaching another one specific to intimate partner violence. Lisa, who is our victim services staff member, assigned to the academy, will be working with our staff during basic role plays, which are ongoing, and intermediate role plays, which will take place in early November. We also had the cadets review online educational modules from the Office of Justice programs within the Department of Justice and their Office for Victims of Crime to understand any current training gaps. We want to make sure that our cadets have access to the most up-to-date information and are proactively seeking these opportunities. In total, we have over 250 cadet reviews on the modules and are evaluating that feedback. We're sharing the feedback on crime-specific modules, for instance, elderly abuse, with both the instructor of the course and with victim services, so the relevant material can be incorporated. In this section, the areas that we need to focus on, we are reflecting on the feedback and making changes. Some of these courses were successful, while others still need more work. So similar to the section on community engagement, we need to make sure that the right people are working with our instructors to supplement the TCOL content. We will look forward to making more progress in this area, and I will discuss this a little bit more in this next section. So next slide, please. With regard to community engagement, you heard about Community Connect. Kroll has highlighted the success of the Community Connect program. We'll be building on that program for the next and future academy classes. I want to say thank you to our community partners who participated in this effort and look forward to engaging new community partners as we build the program out. We will be putting in new courses with regard to the incorporation of mindfulness and resiliency. You heard Kroll talking about that, as well as more community engagement hours. And then with regard to the Academy Curriculum Committee, we find that to be a success. Overall, the Kroll report reinforced that we are on the right track with that committee. I know that community members have been anxious about the amount of material and our ability to be able to get through it in an efficient and kind of quick way. In response, we have moved towards more working group meetings and increased the number of classes that are being reviewed. So the number of courses and the exact courses have been identified for the rest of this year. In addition to the courses, we've also included the committee in reviewing various documents that we are utilizing to improve our curriculum process, including the new process of curriculum review that will include peer review by instructors, corporal level review, sergeant level review, lieutenant level review, and then our civilian team, which is the training and education team that are out there as well. Each part of that review process details the exact areas of review to ensure that no important components of the curriculum are missed in that review. We've developed an instructor evaluation form, which is new and will be utilized by the training team and supervisors to help instructors improve performance, as well as an improved lesson plan format to distinguish the active learning components. At the same time, we're refining the process with community input to balance the amount of material and the level of attention that the committee needs to spend to be able to review the material, give feedback, and get feedback from APD on the course once it was taught. And finally, while the committee is advisory, we want the committee to be able to advise on all academy curriculum, including courses taught to our current officers. Every aspect of our training needs to understand a community lens, and we are glad that this committee is working with us towards this goal. The areas that we need to focus on include bringing in more lived experience and subject matter experts. That was a recommendation. Kroll points out repeatedly that we need to have community members and SMEs in many classes. We have hired a part-time community engagement specialist to assist us in our outreach to universities and community groups. The relationships take time. We want to invest in those relationships. I look forward to sharing more about that progress in our future meetings. And then with regard to the video review committee or panel, I think that you heard a little bit about that from Kroll as well. They certainly have been an important part of getting our academy going again and in academy reform. I want to thank the members who have stayed on this committee from the start. It has been a slower process to figure out how to move from that initial diagnostic stage where the committee presented evidence of our needs to the current stage where APD lieutenants are working with the committee on helping improve our process for reviewing video. Similar to Kroll's position, we also value the importance of video as a training tool, and therefore the committee is working towards several goals, including assisting in developing a video review worksheet and class video overview form to document video reviews and aggregate video data for each class with clear learning objectives for each video that we use. They're also assisting in developing the internal supervisor video review process, auditing the review process by reviewing various course videos with academy instructors and providing those instructors with constructive feedback, adjusting and refining the video review process based on those audits, helping to identify additional sources of video with content that's going to be suitable, and helping create a presentation for training instructors on incorporating community perspectives and lived experiences into selecting videos for our training classes. I'm very proud of both committees. They are demonstrations of the efforts that we have taken to involve community voices in our training academy. I think it's important to address both the successes and the challenges that both of our community committees have faced. As noted by the 2-week pause that we took on the committees in early August, we want to refine these processes, and I'm pleased to see that Kroll identified areas where we have been able to be successful. And if I can get the next slide. I'm just going to go over very quickly the recommendations, our response, and what we anticipate the timeline to be. With regard to the use of instructional videos, APD agrees with this recommendation. And the video review panel is working, as I discussed, on helping academy staff refine that process so that we can select and use videos using a community lens. With regard to performance accountability, we agree with the Kroll recommendations and we'll be moving, as I said, to an individual accountability phase, as well as appropriately scheduling time in future classes for performance accountability. Making the adjustments to Community Connect, we agree with this recommendation. Future classes will start with an initial week of an introduction to the academy, in which they will come and be in the academy for that week, and then transition to Community Connect for 2 weeks. That will help us to set the framework for the expectations of the academy. With regard to adding the ride-outs, that is under consideration at this point. I believe, and I think that you heard Dan talking about it, that there's value in the cadet write-outs. It is a high priority for us. However, due to the need to get these academies done in a timely fashion and our staffing issues that we are having, this is something that we're probably going to push out to future academies and not necessarily to the ones that will be starting early next year. Next slide, please. With regard to clearly clarifying the authority of the division manager, we agree with this recommendation and will define that role in the Academy Standard Operating Procedure by the end of the year. The scheduling coordination recommendation, we also agree with. We are conducting weekly team meetings as we are preparing curriculum for the next Academy class. And as we bring our learning management system online, that will tremendously help us to be able to see that and to coordinate it in a better fashion. The Learn Skills Unit staffing needs, we agree with this recommendation as well. We will be increasing staffing for the 145th and 146th. One of the toughest things for our LSU instructors is really the toll that it takes on their body. The physical fitness or the physical needs for the defensive tactics and all of the things that they're learning is with instructors. And as you go through 100 people in a class, they're pretty beat up and bruised and limping around, and they need the help. So we will be bringing help online for them. And then finally, with regard to the needed improvement for the facilities, we agree with this recommendation. The funding for a scenario-based training facility that can include additional classroom space, additional gymnasium space, as well as the ability to have a scenario-based training in it has been identified, and through the city manager's office will be advanced when appropriate for council approval. If I can get, I think, the last slide. Okay, so in conclusion, we appreciate the Kroll recommendations and are looking forward to how we can improve our academy, continue to involve our community stakeholders. The process of being under evaluation has been and continues to be challenging, but we're proud of the report as it demonstrates the professional nature of our academy and the instructors' willingness to move to a new training paradigm. We'll be coming up with a strategic plan, as I discussed, to ensure that we're making progress and moving towards achievable and important goals. And the plan will allow us to be transparent with the community on our training goals and build on the lessons that we have learned thus far. Ultimately, we want to train cadets and officers that continue to meet the higher expectations of Austin Police Department, as well as exceed community expectations. Thank you for this time and attention. I look forward to your questions.
Okay, I appreciate I have a couple of questions, but before I do, Farah, I'd like to know what you think about this report.
Thank you, Mayor, for the question. I think the report is comprehensive. I think most of the council knows is because I've been the project manager. I've been pretty involved in the work that Kroll has been doing and in constant communication with Chief Chacon and his staff. I agree 100% with the sentiment that both have shared today in that there has been improvement, but there are areas that we still need to work on to ensure that we really accomplish that Reimagining Academy and that it's also sustainable. So it's not just a one-time situation with an independent evaluator monitoring it. So I do believe that we are on the right path, and I do appreciate the frankness in the conversations that we have, particularly about the areas of improvement and the department's openness to work on that, make the changes that need to be made in real time.
Thank you. Chief, from my observation in reading the report and hearing the report, a lot of progress in a lot of areas that we had identified as real concerns. Still challenges in many of those that we need to make sure that we're moving forward on. This community right now has among its challenges too And that's to make sure that we have cadet classes that are changing the culture in a way that furthers the community's goals and at the same time keeps the community still one of the safest in the country. We also have a need for more police officers out on patrol. And we have a lot of vacant spots that are funded that we need to fill. And I don't think our community has the ability to focus on one or the other of those two challenges. We have to figure out how to do both of those at the same time in a way that does honor to both those needs. My specific question to you is on the conceptual clarity of Reimagine. That was the number that stood out to me. That if we have 57% of the cadets saying that they've run into resistance, that's a concern, because if we're running into resistance, then a lot of the other stuff might not ever take seed or ever take hold. So I appreciate what the work you're doing to address that, because that's the number that really stood out to me. And I'm concerned, and I appreciate that you're going to be helping the training folks understand this concept. I would like to see you get that out to the entire force, because I too believe that if they heard what it was in reality as opposed to what they just hear, that they too, the ones that don't know, would support the effort in the program too. So I would urge you to address that more broadly. We had a speaker speak to us today at the public communication portion at noon, where people can sign up to speak. I don't know if you've heard. It was a woman dealing with homelessness, dealing with encampments near where she lived. And she was pretty adamant that the police officers that have been going out there have been telling her that they're unable to enforce our laws. Something about having been told by the city attorney's office they can't enforce our laws. And we as a group said, not true. And you would like to know who it is that might be out there saying that, because it's not true. But I just wanted to share with you that we spent 10 minutes on that topic with her this afternoon.
I did see that, Mayor, and heard the conversation. Obviously, we've been having this conversation about this topic for some time. My messaging to the officer, as I've said before, has been consistent, that we are going to do our jobs, that we're going to enforce the law in the most appropriate manner. The background that I would like to know from what she was talking about, what would be, and when those comments occurred, were they during times when we were not relocating people because of COVID, or was it during one of the earlier phases of our responsible public space management program that we outlaid towards the effort? And were some of those comments that officers made heard differently than the way that they were meant? But certainly, if we have the names and we can go back and look, because those officers have body-worn cameras and we can look at the video and so forth, then we can do that. My team is working directly on that space, has been, and we have a plan in place to address it.
Great, thank you. Colleagues, Councilmember Alter.
Thank you. Before I ask questions, I want to applaud our cadets in the 144th class for their pursuit of service and what appears from everything I've read and heard to be a really strong and professional approach to what it is means to be a police officer. And I want to thank our academy staff and our chief for embracing the possibilities of change and learning. One of the things that I found most important in the Kroll report, and it's been mentioned, I think, by Ms. Muscadin, and certainly in the way that you frame your remarks, is the willingness to improve the experience, to iterate. It's normal to iterate. It's not going to be perfect right out of the gate, but we're going to look at how we're going to improve, where we can make the experience better, both for our cadets and their experience, but also in terms of their training. I also appreciated the honesty and transparency that was evident in certain sections. So for instance, with respect to performance accountability and with respect to the division manager's authority. So I wanted to say that before asking questions. I have a couple of questions, and I'll try to be as quick as possible. From what I've read and what I understand, a lot of the success and the progress at the Academy has come from Dr. Kringan's ability to get the work done, to work long hours, et cetera. But we're learning that sworn staff ignores her requests or policy direction. And one of the recommendations in the report is to further define the division manager's role. Kroll essentially gives two options. So I would like to understand how you intend to further define the division manager's role. And in your presentation, you said you were going to do it in the Academy's standard operating procedures, but I'm concerned that those are easily and often changed, and that there are ways to codify civilian roles and authorities in the general orders. So I'd like to understand if you will commit to codifying civilian manager roles in the general orders. We do rely a lot on civilian work and expertise in APD, and that's great. But I want to make sure that we're doing what we can to support them, because the success of this endeavor is going to need to be there for her. She's going to need that support, and then for any subsequent leaders of the Academy.
Yeah, thank you, Council Member. I agree with you. We need to provide clarity on exactly what her role is. I think that some of the questions that have been raised about what her authority is are directly related to Chapter 143 of the Government Code, and the fact that we have sworn folks and civilian folks that are out there working, and those questions have been raised with regard to whether she has the authority to give a sworn individual an order or something like that. I think that clearly, when I get out there and I look at the culture that we're building at the Academy, this is not really an issue. She is not attempting to give an order to anyone. She's trying to accomplish what we've asked of her in these very tough circumstances, to do it very quickly and needs timely responses. I think that part of, as I've gotten into the issue, the problem has to do with the number of staff that I have at the Academy and what we're asking of them. And like many of us, when asked multiple things, something will fall off and is not handled as quickly as it needs to be, and has left her in many times frustrated because she feels like it was ignored. We're working on that. But I think it's important also to, Kroll's point, to be able to clearly identify what her role is there in that Academy structure. And that's why we chose the SOP, because that has to do with the Academy. I certainly hear what you are saying, though. And as we look at her role as the level that she is there going to be an opportunity to increase that role as for the entire organization, at which point it may be, and it may be sooner than later, we will have to make that determination about whether it's the most appropriate to put it into the general orders, which obviously covers the entire department, or not. So right now, I'm still having those discussions with staff, and we'll figure out which way is the most appropriate and the timing for each.
Okay, I'd just like to ask you to consider it so that it's, more lasting. Again, we have someone observing right now, and so I'd just like to make sure it's lasting. Let me jump to another question, and I think this might be for Kroll. I'm not sure if it's whoever's appropriate can respond. So many of the field training officer related recommendations were still outstanding. The FTOs are such a crucial piece of the Academy success, and we need to make ensure that they're on board and up to date on training to make sure cadets continue to have the new training reinforced. This has to be done before this class graduates. What's the expected timeline for completion of those recommendations?
I'll take that one. While I was visiting Austin for the ICAT training back in September, I actually met with the supervisor in charge of the FGO program. We had a chance to, that's the nice thing about being on the ground there. I've actually had a chance to sit down and discuss the continual assessment and the deprogramming of active military people that come into the police department from the military or have National Guard duties, those sorts of things, the mental health and wellness kind of thing. So we talked about the this FTO policy has just been updated. Matter of fact, the lieutenant and the sergeant, I was out there a little over a week ago for force options, and they told me they were working on the draft for me to look at. And just yesterday, I received that. I just haven't had a chance to dive into it yet, but I think we are on the right track. They have, I'm very hopeful because the lieutenant and the sergeant that are involved with me on this are very excited about the investment the department's making in the FTO program. So I think that we should, we're working together to make sure that they meet the recommendations that were put forth by our team before this 145th class.
Thank you. If you don't want to add anything, then I'll ask another question of Kroll. The report indicates.
Could I add something to that, Councilwoman, if I could?
Sure.
Much like the mayor, I was, training cadets is one thing, and recruits and shaping minds, and changing officers in the streets is another. I was with Rick last week watching the role plays, and about 40 or 50 of the FTO officers were actually playing the roles at the academy. And I engaged them in conversation, and I was, just a little jaundiced based on my life experience as police officers who've been on the job a while, having different experiences and thoughts than cadets. And when I asked them about what they thought of the training and the changes and the improvements, I was pleasantly surprised that they agreed with a lot of it, felt that, this was great. They thought more physical fitness, more skills training, de-escalation training, and they were quite positive and supportive of the process. And somewhere along the line, they've come back and gone through what the recruits are learning. And, one of them said, that was helpful to me because I haven't been in the academy for a couple of years, and I see a recruit doing something, and I don't want to judge them on things that I did 4 years ago. So I was, it seems like there's a process started with the FTOs that can be built on, and those 40 or so folks who were there, some of them I think on their own time to do role plays were a great step in the right direction. Thank
you. So the last question, I know we're all hungry and tired. I have other questions, but I'll limit myself. The report indicates serious concerns about starting the 145th class in February. For the Kroll team, can you tell us more about whether you think it's feasible for APD to implement all your initial recommendations by February 14th? And if it's not feasible, what is a more appropriate timeline or start date? And I'd also like you to further outline what your concerns are if we start too early.
I'll be happy to take this. I think our primary concerns were when we heard that there was plans potentially to start the 145th in February. Of course, at that time, I think the timeline for our final report had been set at something like March 7th, the first week in March. And so just one thought was, well, if you start the class in February, that's before we've even issued a final report, made any final recommendations, made any final assessments of where the academy is on implementing not just the short-term, but the long-term recommendations, which again, the plan was to have them all implemented prior to the 145th. So that created a kind of an automatic issue that we felt needed to be at least highlighted. Now, we've since had some tentative discussions about potentially moving our final report date up into earlier, sometime in February, probably second week or so of February, and I think we can should be able to do that if that's decided. That at least will help get our final assessment out prior to time. But however, I do think, and I think we've all agreed that a February start date is still going to be problematic and unlikely to be able to assure, all of those recommendations have been implemented. The actual time that's needed, whether we're talking, a month or 2 months, we're as Kroll, we're a little reluctant to kind of interject that. Obviously, that's really a decision for the city to make in consultation with, Chief Chacon and the city manager and OPO. But I think if you were asking our judgment would be probably having some time in March or April would be a more realistic start date in order to be able to assure that sufficient progress is made on the long-term recommendations.
Thank you.
Councilmember Ellis.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to ask a question about the 2 people who stopped going to the academy because of COVID infections. I see in the report that they had to quarantine, and so they missed enough of the class they weren't able to continue, and that you may have further discussions about how to monitor that in the future, and what type of accommodations could be made if that's at all possible. And then I'll follow up with my second question if it's helpful to do them together. But do you have a process for testing or, at least weekly testing or vaccination exemption? Are you doing things like that with the Cadet Academy class?
Yes, so most of the class is vaccinated, and we are testing once a week at the academy. The issue that it makes the police department a little bit different than say, fire EMS or other training academies is just the nature of the work and that they have to be hands-on. For instance, we just went through 4 weeks of skills weeks, doing everything from driving to shooting to defensive tactics, and all of those things really mean very close interaction between the cadets themselves and the cadets and the instructors. And so we need to make sure that we're keeping, if we know that we have some that are, that are positive for COVID, that we take them out of that environment. Many times because of, kind of the workers' comp rules and things like that, they don't have an opportunity to even be remote. If they are asymptomatic, and these are the things that we're working through right now with human resources, is there an opportunity to have them be remote, and can they virtually come into the classroom? Believe me, I need every single one of them, and I want them there. So we're doing everything that we can to do that. With the regards to the ones that we did lose due to COVID, we have worked through human resources to be able to retain them as employees. We're going to find other places for them in the department until we start the 145th, and then they'll have to restart and recycle into that next academy, but at least they'll have the opportunity to do that, and we'll still have a job between now and then.
That's great. That was going to be a follow-up question, so thank you for answering that.
Thank you.
Councilor Kelly.
Thank you, Councilmember Ellis, for bringing that up about the cadets that caught COVID. That was a concern of mine as well, and I'm glad that it's addressed, especially for future cadets, so that they're still able to retain their jobs.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for this really thorough report, for the thorough presentation today, and the thorough response. This is all really interesting. I have actually quite a few questions, but I'll try to limit them as well. So going back and forth between the report and the presentation and the response from APD, I think what I'd like to understand, Chief Chacon, is what do you mean by an appropriately scheduled time for the administering performance accountability? I'm assuming, given the tie between some injuries that were noted in the Kroll report and those sessions, that by appropriate scheduling, you're talking about what they were talking about with regard to not having cadets go right from the classroom to those, or in different settings where they might be safer or more warmed up. I've got
That's
the
correct.
word for it, but Yeah, can you just confirm that that's,
Yes, that's correct,
intent.
Councilmember. So what we will no longer be doing is pulling them directly out of class or asking them to, to stop class or take away from class time in order to do performance accountability. There's two things. Number one, the cadets need to be warmed up. And we recognize that. And while I think that some of the injuries that occurred during performance accountability, I'm not sure could be directly linked to the fact that we didn't warm them up. That is a concern for me, certainly. And so I don't even want to take that chance. So having that done, and the other part is moving it, the ideal situation is to do it during the physical training part of the academy so that we just build that in and add that time on if there's some accountability measures that need to happen. The problem is that we don't have PT every single day. And so moving that to a separate day sometimes has been something that the staff has said has not been as effective. So we're going to need to build some time into the academy to make sure that we are not taking away from the classroom time or pushing that performance accountability session to the next day. Whatever's going to make sure that that our cadets are, that they are staying warmed up, that they're doing it at the appropriate time, that we're not cutting in a classroom, and that we're still maintaining that, kind of the accountability piece, that they understand that and kind of embody that and don't repeat it.
there were also some, I don't mean to spend too much time on this issue, but just very quickly, there were also some recommendations about the kinds of infractions that should lead to that response. Is that something you also intend to respond to?
I'm working with staff through
Okay.
that. I think that a lot of this goes back to the way that we've done things at the academy for a really long time, making sure that we have a disciplined environment, that we have cadets that really respect that and understand that, and sometimes that doesn't happen. And so even as it may seem to be a minor infraction, and I'm not saying that we should be having performance accountability for minor infractions, but they need to be pointed out and they need to be appropriately handled. Maybe not in every instance with a performance accountability session, but rather by having a stern talking to, having them write a memo, or having a meeting with their instructor counselor. It might be more appropriate. Those are all the things right now that, as a staff, the training staff is working to make sure that we're doing it the right way.
Thank you, especially since you ended by talking about respect and how important that is. And when I have some questions, and because of the late hour and because of the time, I'm trying to rush. But I want to just say, one of the things that I really appreciated about the Kroll report is the extensive quoting they did of your intro speech. And I thought that really gave, obviously I wasn't there. And so that really gave me a very clear sense of the tone you set and the work that you did to create right from the outset of an important culture for the new cadets. So thank you for your comments, and thank you, Kroll, for including that level of detail, not just there, but throughout the report, to really help us get a very clear sense of the tone that was being set. I wanted to talk, though, about, one of the comments that I thought was interesting, maybe because questioning and creating spaces where questioning is a valued thing is on my mind today, especially because some of the earlier conversations we've had here. One of the comments jumped out at me on page 34, and that was a comment from one of the cadets. I've yet to ask a question in the classroom setting because of the strict rules surrounding addressing instructors. I understand completely the need to demonstrate respect for instructors, and there are plenty of opportunities for that throughout the day outside the classroom. However, in the classroom, it is completely counterproductive. There wasn't any context provided for that comment, so I'm not really sure what they're referring to, but I definitely think it's important for people to be able to and feel welcome to ask questions as they occur to them throughout the day, at appropriate intervals, obviously. Do you have any sense of what are they talking about? Maybe this is a better question for Kroll. What are they talking about the rules related to how one addresses instructors?
I could take that, Madam Councilor. So if you want to ask a question as a cadet in the classroom setting, you have to stand up at the position of attention, identify yourself as recruit or cadet officer Linsky. My ID number is 97614. Sir, ma'am, here's my question. And, you know, I understand that. I grew up in that world. That happens in academies throughout the country. I also was an academy instructor, and the first thing I said when I was teaching criminal law is, stay in your seats. I want you to have a good exchange of information with me. Outside PT, we're going to do that. In this classroom, I'm here to exchange information with you. I want you to relax and be comfortable having a conversation with me. I can tell you there's a mixed crew at the academy. Some folks keep the formal process, and instructors keep the formal process, and the cadets go through it. And some instructors say, hey, gather around. What do you got? Any questions, any comments, any thoughts, any ideas? And I think that's where the cadet came from, that they felt like, you know what, I'd rather just wait till after. And you do see a lot of it where they won't ask a question in front of their fellow classmates, and then there'll be a break, and they'll go up to the instructor and say, you know, sir, ma'am, can I ask you a question? What about this, that, and the other thing? And they have those informal conversations. So I think it's just balancing the way things have always been done, and, you know, kind of balancing the adult learning model going forward.
Thanks for that. That's very helpful. So two situations I wanted to talk about. There was, I really thought, I thought there was a lot of evidence throughout that really illustrates enormous progress. And again, because of the hour, I'm not necessarily highlighting that, but I just want to commend you and your staff. I really thought that this was a very strong report, shows a lot of responsiveness. I know several of us were in communication with one of the community members who participated in the community connections and told us had on his Facebook page and then followed up with an email talking about how he had made the offer to the cadet class. If you ever want to come and seek me out, you know, I'm here and available to talk. And at least one of the cadets did that, showed up at his house and continued that conversation. So to me, that coupled with the conversations I had with your cadets at that event where there were, you know, it was an introduction, suggests that community connections piece is really valuable. And so I appreciate the way Kroll has suggested ways to kind of integrate that throughout. But again, I think I see a lot of real reason to be very excited about the work that's going on. A couple of the things that I did want to know, Chief, how you intend to respond to. In a couple of the classes, racial profiling and then sexual harassment. I think those are the two classes that stood out for me as having some real areas of improvement. And some of the conversation sounded a little bit like this is the way we should do it, and I think this is what Kroll said with regard to sexual harassment. There was a little too much emphasis on be careful to do it this way because you might get into trouble, and needed to be more emphasis on all forms of harassment and retaliation are strictly prohibited because this sort of conduct is wrong and can't be tolerated. To me, that same assertion could be made about the comments in the racial profiling class. So how do you intend to address those issues? And this is leading up to my final question, which is going to be the one about timing with regard to the academy, next academy.
So this is what's so great about this process is we knew we weren't going to get it exactly right. And having Kroll sit in on especially the really critical ones, whether it is the ones that you mentioned or some of the other ones that I think that there's certainly some areas for improvement, is to be able to use folks that we brought online, Dr. Kringen and Alex, to be able to focus on those classes, help instructors to learn, expand their skill set a little bit on how they're conducting that instruction, and then continue again to just kind of, as the classes, as the cadet classes move forward in the future, how can we continue to improve those? Also the work that the Curriculum Review Committee is doing to make sure that, that the curriculum is outlaid the right way and that we're putting the right focus on those. So I think it's going to be an iterative process where we continue to improve and we put the focus where it needs to be. And then with regard to, I think your last question you said was the timing of the next class, right?
It was, thank you.
So I'll tell you, I think it's very important to me. I think it should be important to everybody that we put these classes through on the fastest timeline that we can. I'm not saying that we ever sacrifice quality or that we don't do everything that's required of us, either through the recommendations or the scrutiny that's been placed on getting this right. But I think that we need to redouble our efforts to get it done as timely as possible and to move those up. I'm in favor of starting a February class, asking Kroll to, if it's possible, to produce that report so that we have an opportunity to go over it and get that class started as soon as possible, because the sooner I start it, the sooner I graduate them. So that's going to be my recommendation.
Yeah, thanks for that. I appreciate that. I concur that we need those classes as soon as possible. And I want to recognize it's kind of an unusual thing to iterate while a program is going on. And frankly, we don't often iterate as often as we need to in an institution like the city. So thank you for taking that approach and being willing to try that process even as it was going on. And I hope that, do you feel that you can respond to the changes that were recommended in the time frame?
I do.
Okay, thank you. Thank you again, everyone, for your work on this.
Colleagues, anything else? Chief, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, Kroll and experts, thank you for being with us. Pretty extensive work. Please stay engaged. There's a lot of work left to do, and we appreciate the work you're doing and the quality of it.
Thank you.
Ken, it's good to see you actually up and about. Anything else? Manager? We set? Okay. Then this meeting is adjourned at 8:08 this evening. See you all later.